Hello, role-playing people, and this episode is a reply to Felipe Correal, who invited me to have a look at the lore of the Forge, paying special attention to the second dot, activate object, and maybe give a few tips on how to play a malefactor without overextending, without abusing the powerful evocations of the lore of the Forge. Hello Felipe, hope you're doing well and the Demon Chronicle is a blast. I'm happy to say the very first demon character I enjoyed as a player was a malefactor, so I'm not seeing these abilities just from the perspective of the storyteller. I actually have experience with them as a player. Listener, be warned, I will walk you through my thought process regarding the interpretation and use of this power, so I might ramble a bit, but it's all for the purpose of actually reaching a practical conclusion after having looked at this ability from all angles. Let's start by reading what this evocation does. Activate object. With this evocation, the demon can cause mechanical objects to operate by simple force of will. System: roll intelligence plus crafts. The difficulty is determined by the complexity of the object. Causing a door to open is difficulty 5, while making a pistol chamber around and fire is 8. This evocation works only on objects that operate by simple mechanical means. Hinges move, levers operate, but hammers don't pick themselves up and start banging away at nails. An elevator button could depress, or a computer's power switch could turn off or on, but the inner workings of the computer's memory aren't affected. The character can affect a single object within a number of yards equal to her faith score. Torment. A machine affected by a monstrous demon's will often breaks or goes wildly out of control, damaging or destroying itself in the process. When making the Stamina plus Crafts roll to activate the object, also apply the number of successes rolled as damage levels to the object. Okay, it says intelligence plus crafts. So anyway, goes without saying, in typical Demon the Fallen manner, we have some contradictions in how the power is described and also in the mechanics. So is it intelligence or is it stamina? Difficulty is determined by the complexity of the object, but the evocation works on objects that operate by simple mechanical means. Now, mechanical doesn't necessarily mean simple. Even with objects that perform a very obvious and simple function. You can have something like a puzzle box that has multiple hinges or even different types of hinges. Using the first dot of the lore of the Forge to understand what the item does will reveal its function, the purpose of its use, the fact that it is a sealed container that can only be opened by figuring out the correct sequence of permutations and moves. But does it reveal the actual sequence of permutations itself? I think not. It's all mechanical, yes, but it's super complex, and the object itself is also the locking mechanism. It's not like a door that also has a lock on it, right? So then, what do we do in this situation? Can the character even do it? The roll seems fair for most circumstances, especially for a puzzle box. It's intelligence plus crafts. But then, what would be the difficulty? Well, this really is for the storyteller to decide. If we go by the examples in the book, opening a door is a simple 5, getting a gun to fire is difficulty 8. Yikes! We can only imagine what the difficulty for opening the aforementioned puzzle box would be, or for a safe that has multiple locks and hinges, or the difficulty for activating a car. And since we're talking about cars, there's the matter of size. All of the examples given here are tiny objects, right? A door's locking mechanism, a pistol, an elevator button, or a computer's power switch. Tiny. What about a car? See, because the difficulty depends on complexity, but there is no mention of size. So then my immediate question is, does the character have to control the entire object or just the part of it related to the function they want the object to perform? To turn the key and start the car, is it enough to control the key or the key slot or both, or does the character need to gain control of the entire vehicle? But this leads to more questions. A car also incorporates electrical systems. It is larger than a man, and it is a very complex object with multiple secondary functions that ultimately are activated mechanically by the press of a button. It can produce light, it can store things in the trunk, it has flammable substances in the tank. You can let the seats all the way down and improvise a bed. It can play music using the radio and the speakers, and so on. So then, can the malefactor activate multiple or all of its functions with a single use of this evocation? Can they start the engine and make the car drive itself for at least one turn, while also turning on the radio and getting the seats to adjust themselves? Well, the power is called activate object, not control object. So we can assume the item can only be activated to perform a single function, though that activation might result in a prolonged or ongoing effect. Though it's not mentioned, we can pretty safely assume that each use of this power only lasts for one turn, or one activation. So getting a gun to fire would initiate but also conclude the effect within one turn, whereas starting a computer by pressing a button results in the computer being on even after the direct use of activate object is concluded. With these questions in mind, it's safe to say players and storytellers alike could have used more explanation and details regarding the use of this power. Something else we know is that the malefactor can only affect objects that are within a radius equal to faith rating in yards. So I feel like this already limits outright abusive uses of this power that cannot even be seen coming. The kind of situations where the character is sitting in their hideout with binoculars on their face, causing malfunctions in some apartment on the other side of the neighborhood. So that's good. It cannot be used for sniping. Okay, these were my thoughts as GM. Now, as a player, considering that the difficulty is variable, I've always asked the storyteller if I can use the evocation on certain objects and to achieve certain results every time I wanted my malefactor to call upon this power, which in my case wasn't very frequent. I've played with plenty of people who have used their protagonist's superpowers for the silliest of things, just because they could, just because they thought, oh, this is so cool. But if it doesn't actually further the story, if it doesn't assist the scene, revealing more of the protagonist's traits or helping them acquire something that is of genuine use, it gets old really fast. I've seen characters use telekinesis to levitate a bag full of groceries just because the player thought it was cool, or the Slayer who uses ghosts as his personal drivers, or dishwashers. Look, it's funny the first 2 times they do it, but then it becomes cheap very quickly. That is why, personally, I only resort to evocations when using such powers is meaningful and packs a punch, story-wise. For instance, during an encounter, I used the High Torment evocation to break down an attacker's gun into constituent pieces. It just broke in their hands. Using this power made a lot of sense in that context because I wanted my malefactor to intimidate this individual into submission without causing physical harm. This mortal who seemingly had the upper hand in the negotiation because he had a gun. Now, the fact that I disarmed him and let him live actually resulted in an alliance with a mortal hunter further into the story. So that was very nice and quite an unforeseen consequence. When it came to the low torment version, I always tried to make it easier on the storyteller by being very precise with how I want to use this evocation and why I'm using it as such. You know, making my intentions perfectly clear before they decide to allow something or not, as I think one should do in a collaborative storytelling experience. That being said, I try to shy away from phrases like, I want to gain control of the wrecking ball. Does that happen? Ha! Then I will use it to smash the car. Whoa, 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 are you ambushing the storyteller or telling a collaborative story? So instead I would ask, Could my character use activate object to gain control of the wrecking ball and destroy that guy's car? He really got on my nerves. I would really like to do that. And then, knowing full well where I'm going with this, the storyteller can make an informed ruling. If they say, yes, go for it, then I can describe how the protagonist goes about activating the evocation and, of course, make the roll to see if it happens or not. In light of this, my experience with this evocation has been really smooth, and I do agree that it can have very powerful effects, but I think such effects are situational and context dependent. In your comment, you mentioned using this to open a safe and walk away with a fortune or important information. Personally, I don't consider that to be OP, and I would allow such actions any day in my games, because no one comes to a Demon the Fallen game to have their character work a 9 to 5 throughout the Chronicle, right? They're playing a demon. Gehenna's just around the corner and they need all the resources they can get in their fight against the Earthbound. So as long as the player is aware that lawless or immoral activities might earn their protagonist one or more temporary torment points and might lead to unwanted attention from law enforcement or other such organizations, then there's no problem. Acquiring resources is probably one of the first things any Fallen would do upon returning from the pit, and the houses actually have different means of achieving the same result, resource acquisition. With the very first dot in the lore of Radiance, a devil can just command a wealthy mortal into legally handing over their entire fortune and livelihood, and using the same evocation could easily command them into silence. The skilled defiler can just impersonate a rich and wealthy mortal, enjoying all of the luxuries that come with bearing this new persona. When they get sick of it, they can just stop. The scourges, of course, have it extremely easy because people will pay a fortune for healing, especially if their condition has no known cure. So when we compare these to the Malefactor's powers, we can see Lore of the Forge also have their means of earning the demons some financial resources and influence too, though most such uses would probably be illicit, abusive, and immoral, from mortals' point of view. You know, breaking and entering, theft, etc. So this evocation is powerful, but might just earn your character quite a bit of torment. In the end, I think there's a trade-off here. To conclude, from my point of view, this evocation's usefulness really depends on context. And context is something that also depends very much on the storyteller and group, so I don't think clever uses of this power should create any adverse effects at the table. If it makes sense to your protagonist and if it genuinely helps further their goals, then I see no problem here. What the player can do to keep things smooth is, number 1, limit each use of this evocation to one object at a time and the number of functions equal to successes, unless the storyteller decides otherwise. So in the example with the car, if you score only one success, you can get it to do only one thing at a time. Maybe flash headlights, maybe turn on the radio, or start the engine, or using high torment, break the steering system, trash the handbrake, or deal damage to the tank, causing fuel to leak under the vehicle. The reason I say this is because, as phrased in the book, the power doesn't allow active and prolonged control over the object, right? Only the activation of a particular function or functions. 2. Tell your storyteller how you intend to use the evocation and to what effect, so they can adjust the difficulty accordingly. When it comes to complex items of large size with multiple functions, gaining control of a single fragment of that object for the purpose of achieving a specific effect might be done at lower difficulty if the storyteller allows. Complex items are always made of simpler constituent pieces, so that's something to take into account. Depending on your GM, restrictions might apply due to size, and some objects might just be too complex for the character to activate. 3. Use the power in varied ways and for various results. I've often seen players repeating the same use of the same power in the same context just because it works extremely well and they always get good results. So you can challenge yourself to get creative with this and let each use lead to a different outcome. In combat, of course, uses will be limited to the most effective because survival is of utmost importance in that situation. Uses like hijacking an attacker's weapon and either getting it to turn on its user or breaking it into useless junk. But outside of such situations, like you pointed out, you can use this to crack safes, open doors, create distractions, create accidents. But also you can use such powers in a more social setting. Like the very clothes we wear are man-made objects, entirely mechanical, so you can easily destroy someone's attire right as they take to the podium. Buttons falling off, zippers being open, a loose piece of material snags onto something and just tears the suit right up, leaving the wearer naked and ashamed as the room just erupts into laughter. 4. Enjoy the character and enjoy the evocation. Just make things happen. Don't worry about it being too OP or overextending, because your storyteller will have the final say in regards to difficulty and whether an item is beyond manipulation by using this power. But yeah, ask your GM if something would work the way you envision and clarify your intention before declaring, "Ha, I do this," only to be told, I don't think it works that way. So I hope you find this take interesting and I hope these tips are of use. I'm aware I've probably raised more questions than to provide answers, but I believe collaboration and collaborative rulings are the way to go when it comes to an ability that has variable difficulties and might not work on some objects depending on complexity or size. Thank you very much for listening. Take care, have fun, and have a wonderful Chronicle.